We're here today in the midst of a national debate, a national discussion of immigration reform that is finally maturing. After decades, this country is finally acknowledging and beginning to embrace the people who are here with us, our neighbors, our colleagues, people who work every day to make our economy run. We're finally being willing as a nation to acknowledge reality and do something about it. And we see now in Washington, even Republican members of the U.S. Senate rapidly embracing the cause of comprehensive immigration reform. Now, some of them, it may be a matter of conscience, and for others, it may be a matter of having watched election results and demographic trends. But the bottom line is a national consensus is quickly forming that we have to act to make sure that those who are currently undocumented are helped to become full members of our society. Now, the national dynamics are moving, but we have no illusions about how quickly or how completely they will move. We've all been through this too long to rest on any laurels. So it's time for localities around this country to step up. New York City and New York State have long since, in many ways, acknowledged and embraced the reality of people who are here and part of our society but not yet documented. We have embraced the fact that we are a city and state of immigrants. We are the quintessential city and state of immigrants. And we've understood in the past that we had to lead in terms of welcoming and supporting all of those among us. Now, recently, other states have started to move in some of the ways necessary, even more assertively than New York. And it's time for New York to lead again. Let's just remember, this is a city where over a third of our fellow New Yorkers are foreign-born, where there are almost 500,000 undocumented people participating in our life and in our economy every single day. But for those who are undocumented, there's many things they can't do, whether it's opening a bank account or signing a lease or so many other things that are part of everyday life that they're still excluded from. We know for a fact that even legal immigrants, documented immigrants, worry about their interaction with city authorities. They worry that somehow they may be put in a compromising situation in terms of the federal government. And there are even some who have done everything right and are punished by the city of New York simply because they took fair advantage of benefits coming to them, and then they or family members were asked to pay them back. This is not the reality of a city that is fully embracing and recognizing our neighbors and those who are part of this society. This means we simply haven't gone far enough to fully integrate everyone here, and we need to lead. So today I am unveiling a legislative agenda. We've called it Safe, Open City. Safe, Open City. And the goal is to bring families out of the shadows and start the work locally that we hope soon the federal government will fully embrace and act on. Let me talk about the 5 points. They're here very quickly. One, we at the Public Advocate's Office, we documented over the last 2 years this horrible reality of privately run detention centers that the federal government uses for undocumented immigrants and others. They don't follow any of the justice standards that our traditional justice system in this country, our public justice system, follows. They're unfair to people in them, so many of whom are innocent. We know that we have to change the city's approach to make sure that we do not end up sending innocent people or those who have done very minor offenses into an unjust system, a system that literally includes private prisons. We have heard examples of people who have called with a legitimate crime that they report, reporting a crime, not perpetrating a crime, who end up being detained and sent into these unjust systems. So the goal here is to end cooperation with the federal quote-unquote detainers, with the exception of the obvious serious crimes, violent crimes, obviously any acts of terrorism or drug trafficking, human trafficking, any of the serious crimes would be exempted. But when it comes to misdemeanors, non-violent, low-level crimes, we want to make sure that people are not sent by our city inadvertently into an unjust system. 2, as I mentioned, right now in New York City, folks who have done everything appropriately, who have sponsored someone to come here and become, over time, a U.S. citizen, find that when that individual rightfully gets benefits from the city, that the sponsor is then asked by the Human Resources Administration to pay back the city for those benefits. It makes no sense whatsoever. People who have followed the rules and are only accepting what is due them find that their family members are penalized, which means that either they will not seek benefits they deserve, or family members, often who are economically stressed to begin with, end up having to pay a cost they cannot afford. Now, I want to stress, I want to see New York City be a leader in the effort for immigration reform, be a leader in creating the reality on the ground of a just society. But in this case with HRA, we are literally the only jurisdiction that does this. The only one in the country that forces sponsors to pay for the benefits of those they sponsor. Now, this third item relates to domestic violence victims. And this is an issue I've worked on for many years. When I was in the City Council, chairman of the General Welfare Committee, we passed legislation to grant emergency shelter for domestic violence victims, to protect domestic violence victims in the workplace. I was shocked to find out that the one effort we make to encourage immigrants who are victims of domestic violence to come forward is an effort created by law enforcement to offer a special visa opportunity, a short-term visa opportunity for those who work with law enforcement to identify and prosecute perpetrators of crimes. This is such a good idea, and yet it is not being applied consistently by the City of New York. We are trying to catch criminals. We are trying to support women who are domestic violence victims. And yet, what happens is certain agencies do a fine job of certifying that these women were victims and can help in prosecution. Others don't. There's an inconsistency over the city agencies that unfortunately allows some victims to continue to be at risk and means we can't do some of the prosecutions we need to effectively. I've called for, and I've introduced City Council legislation to appoint a monitor at every pertinent agency to make sure that there's standardization of these requests, that they're acted on speedily and effectively each and every time. Now, fourth, we need to acknowledge that so many people, again, almost 500,000 people among us, have no acceptable way to get identification. We all know that ID allows you to participate appropriately in modern society. That's why I'm putting forward legislation, again, as my role as public advocate allows me to introduce legislation into the City Council. I'm introducing legislation to create a city-issued ID card for undocumented individuals. Los Angeles, San Francisco, New Haven, Connecticut are all in the process of setting up similar systems or have them already. Now, this would allow an undocumented person to do what everyone else does, to go to a library, to go to a recreation center, to sign a lease, cash a check, file a police report, and have an ID to back up the fact that they're telling the police something the police need to know. This is part of bringing people into the process, helping them to participate fully. Now, one example from New Haven, Connecticut, where there's been real success. In the Fairhaven neighborhood, a heavily immigrant neighborhood of New Haven, IDs were issued and throughout the city, and then a study was done, and the study proved that there was a drop in crime in that neighborhood of 20% because there was new cooperation and communication between police and immigrants. And finally, calling for the state to pass legislation long overdue to provide secure driver's licenses for undocumented immigrants. The fact is that the state of Colorado is about to finalize its plan to provide undocumented immigrants with driver's licenses. Colorado is a place, it's a beautiful place. It's not necessarily known as an enlightened jurisdiction, but they're moving. because they recognize reality. New York City, New York State have not taken this kind of move, and we need to. We need to make sure that people who need a driver's license for their work, for their lives, are getting it the right way and are part of our system and have the same checks and balances as everyone else. I want to commend State Senator Espaillat and Assemblymember Rosa, who have introduced this legislation, and say that I think it'll make a big difference for the safety of all of us and for fairness for those who live among us and don't have the right now. In the end, this is all, I think, about common sense, about decency, about compassion, but it's also about creating a fully integrated society. A society where everyone knows that they have rights and opportunities. It's New York City taking the lead, building the reality that we hope soon will be codified by federal legislation. But as we've often learned, sometimes our friends at the federal level need to be helped along, and we have to create the reality on the ground for them to follow. And that's why this package is so important. Finally, for our colleagues in the Spanish media, no podemos dejar a los inmigrantes en las sombras. Tener una identificación les abre puertas y hará que todos los inmigrantes sean miembros de nuestra sociedad. Tenemos que dejar de castigar a las familias y a nuestras comunidades.